He created the modern world, but he hated what it became. He paid his workers double the market rate, but hired a private army of thugs to keep them in line. Henry Ford was a walking paradox, a hero to the masses, a nightmare to his rivals, and a man who spent his life trying to escape the very industrial machine he built. But before he was a legend, he was a man who failed 5 times, 5 catastrophic, public, and humiliating bankruptcies that should have ended his career before it even started. Today, we aren't just talking about a biography. We're looking at the secret protocol Henry Ford used to turn a string of disasters into a $60 billion empire. If you've ever felt like your best ideas are being ignored, or that you're one mistake away from losing it all, this story is for you. It all started with a pocket watch and a 12-year-old boy. In a small Michigan farmhouse, young Henry Ford was obsessed. Every night while the house was silent, he would secretly take apart his father's watch. His father saw a boy neglecting his chores. The neighbors saw a kid who was a bit off. But Henry was seeing something else. He saw that each gear, no matter how small, was useless on its own. It was only when they worked in perfect, synchronized harmony that the watch came alive. That simple childhood observation became the foundation for everything he would ever build. He realized early on that efficiency isn't just about working harder, it's about how the pieces fit together. But knowing how a machine works is very different from knowing how a business works. In 1899, Ford quit his stable job at the Edison Illuminating Company to launch his first startup, the Detroit Automobile Company. He had the passion, he had the backing, and he had the dream of a car for the people. And it was a total disaster. The cars were expensive, poor quality, and heavy. His investors grew impatient, his team was disorganized, and within 18 months, the company was bankrupt. He had put his reputation on the line and walked away with nothing but bitter lessons. This is where most people stop. They take the failure personally. They think, maybe I'm just not an entrepreneur. But Ford looked at the wreckage and said, failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently.
So, he tried again. His second attempt, the Henry Ford Company, was even more painful. This time, he didn't just lose money. He was kicked out of the very company that carried his own name. He left with $900 and the clothes on his back. His former partners took his designs, hired a new engineer, and renamed the company Cadillac. Think about that for a second. Henry Ford's second major failure literally created his biggest competitor. At 40 years old, with 2 bankruptcies behind him, the world saw him as a loser. But Ford understood a fundamental truth about success. You don't find the right path by guessing, you find it by eliminating the wrong ones. He realized he had been rushing products to market and losing control to investors who didn't share his vision. He needed a new strategy.
He turned to racing. It was a gamble. He built a monster called 999, an 80-horsepower beast that was so terrifying to drive that even Ford was afraid to get behind the wheel. He hired a fearless cyclist named Barney Oldfield to drive it. When that car shattered speed records and landed in every headline in America, the narrative changed. He wasn't the bankrupt farmer anymore. He was the engineering wizard. He used that fame to attract one last group of investors for the Ford Motor Company in 1903. But even then, success wasn't guaranteed. Just weeks after starting, the company's bank account dropped to $223. They were days away from a third bankruptcy. A single sale to a Chicago dentist for $850 was the only thing that kept the doors open.
This is the point in the story where we talk about the auto cartel. At the time, a group of powerful millionaires held a patent on the very idea of a gasoline automobile. They told Ford he couldn't build cars without their permission and a cut of his profits. They expected him to bow down. Instead, he sued them. He positioned himself as the anti-monopolist, the heroic individual fighting for the little guy. He told the public that the car shouldn't be a luxury for the rich, but a utility for the masses. While he fought this multi-year legal war, he retreated to a secret room on the 3rd floor of his factory. He and a tiny team spent 10 months obsessing over every bolt and gear. The result was the Model T.
The Model T wasn't just a car, it was a revolution in simplicity. It had high ground clearance for the muddy wagon rucks of rural America. It was rugged, it was easy to fix. But Ford's greatest innovation wasn't the car itself, it was how he made it. Inspired by the efficiency of a meatpacking plant, he introduced the moving assembly line. Before the line, it took 12 hours to build one car. After the line, it took 93 minutes. By 1920, a new Model T was rolling off the line every 10 seconds. This is the lesson for every manager and entrepreneur listening. You don't scale by doing more of the same. You scale by radically changing the process. But with this massive success came a new problem. His workers were miserable. The work was mind-numbingly repetitive. People were quitting in droves. So Ford did the unthinkable. He doubled the average wage to $5 a day and shortened the work week. Other business leaders called him a socialist, a madman who would destroy the economy. But Ford wasn't being charitable, he was being strategic. He realized that if his workers couldn't afford the products they were building, his market would eventually dry up. By creating the $5 day, he didn't just save his workforce, he literally created the American middle class. He turned his employees into his best customers.
However, the same drive that made him a genius also made him a tyrant. As he grew older, Ford became obsessed with control. He hated change. When his son, Edsel, begged him to update the aging Model T to compete with newer, flashier cars from General Motors, Ford refused. He even destroyed a prototype Edsel had built in secret. He created a service department, essentially a private police force to monitor his employees' lives, both in the factory and at home. He even tried to build a utopian city in the Amazon jungle called Fordlandia to control his rubber supply, a project that ended in a multi-million-dollar disaster. He had become a prisoner of his own success, unable to listen to the very people who wanted to help him grow.
The tragedy of Henry Ford's later years is a warning to all of us. Success is a double-edged sword. The same stubbornness that helps you survive 5 bankruptcies can also blind you to the changing world around you. He almost lost the company to his own rigidity, only saved when his wife and daughter-in-law threatened to sell their shares if he didn't hand control to his grandson. So what is the Ford protocol for your life? First, embrace the relentless restart. Every failure is just data. Second, focus on mass value. Third, remember that process is product. And finally, stay open to the pivot. Henry Ford once said, "Whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. The gears are in your hands. Now make them move."